So my area of research and the things that I'm interested are centered around trying to understand tussles that exist on the internet, right? The internet serves many different communities, and often each of these communities has conflicting goals and ideologies. And as the diversity on the internet starts to increase, we start to see these goals and ideologies starting to conflict with each other. And we start to see tussles emerge. And my job as a researcher, or the things I like to do as a researcher, are perform quantitative measurements of the tussles that exist on the internet. And the reason that this is important is because it gives people who are able to facilitate effective public debate and write meaningful regulation or policy around these tussles actual quantitative evidence on which they can base their regulation and debate. But the problem is that getting these numbers is often quite difficult to do. And the reason that it's difficult is because the internet is opaque. Often there are many hidden interests at play, and business relationships between entities on the internet are unknown. The internet is very diverse. There's a range of different networks, a range of different interests at play again. And it's decentralized, which means that getting access to vantage points from which you can conduct measurements is very, very challenging. So getting quantitative evidence of anything on the internet is very hard because you need to deal with all of these things. And funnily enough, it's these three things that make the internet as wonderful as it is today. That's the reason that the internet actually thrives. So just to give you an idea of three tussles that I think have been at the forefront of the internet for the last couple of years. There's a tussle ongoing between privacy and profitability. There's another one that's going on between free speech and civility. And finally, we have something that's quite similar to that, but a little bit different, a tussle between anonymity and accountability. So today, I'm just going to focus on the work I've done over the past year that focuses on the first tussle, right? Every internet user has a right to privacy. And it's really important that we respect that right, because not doing so enables things that aren't so great, and it enables discrimination of users online, and this can translate into real-world discrimination as well. It facilitates the creation of filter bubbles, and it also consolidates systems of oppression and power. But on the other hand, giving all users their privacy right away is quite dangerous because the internet economy is built on user data as its currency. It is the driving force of the internet economy. And so giving users privacy immediately basically means the internet would cease to exist the way it does. And we would have to have content providers and service providers providing services and generating content free of cost. And that's just not fair. So I've been trying to do measurements that can help us move away from such a system. And I'm going to be talking to you about one project that I did today that contributes to that. Everyone in this room probably owns a smartphone and has installed many free apps on that device, right? Well, Joan is an exception. And there's a good reason that these apps are available for free. It's because if you're not paying for the product, it's because you are the product. The thing is, behind each of these apps, there are a large number of tracking organizations which are gathering information not just about how you use the app, but more generally about how you use the device, your device, right? So for example, they're gathering information about who you're calling, who you're texting, what you're doing with your phone, even when the app isn't active, right? And what I wanted to do with my research project was to just try and understand what this ecosystem of trackers look like. So basically, I wanted to track the trackers. I wanted to answer questions such as who they were, what information they were gathering from users, which apps were using which trackers, and what regulatory challenges they presented, right? And to answer this question, in collaboration with researchers at UC Berkeley, Stony Brook University, and several other institutions, we built something called the Lumen Privacy Monitor. What Lumen does is it basically monitors all of the apps that are installed on your device and identifies when any of these apps is sending personally identifiable information from your device to a third party on the internet, right? And thanks to about 15,000 users of the app, And we were able to monitor this behavior in over 40,000 different Android apps. If you are interested in helping us out, you can get the app at haystack.mobi. We take care to aggregate and anonymize all of the information that we use for our research, right? So I want to tell you about some, and the thing is, unless you've actually read the privacy policies of these apps, you aren't aware of actually what information is going from your phone to third parties and how it's being used. And so Haystack allows you as a user to also see this information. Right, so I want to just quickly go over some of the things that we found. Some of these results may not be very surprising. I encourage you to read the whole paper to get at some of the critical information or the challenges that we're going to face from this ecosystem. The first finding was that the mobile tracking ecosystem is basically an oligopoly, right? We identified about 2,400 tracking services on the internet, and when we started analyzing who their parent organizations were and who owned them, we only found that there were 292 parent organizations that owned all of the services that we identified. There were only a handful that we couldn't find parents for. So this entire ecosystem of trackers that's operating on 40,000 different apps had just 292 organizations involved. And we find that there's two organizations, no surprise, Alphabet and Facebook, that dominate this ecosystem. Alphabet was present in Alphabet-owned trackers were present in about 70% of all of the Android apps that we studied, and Facebook-owned trackers were present in over 30% of all of the trackers we studied. So I just want to quickly tell you about what this graph is. So on the y-axis, so this axis right here, we've got the app and service coverage. So that tells you what fraction of apps had a tracker that was owned by one of these 20 organizations on the x-axis, right? So the blue lines tell you what fraction of apps had a tracker from here, and the red line tells you what fraction of trackers in the entire ecosystem they owned, right? So the second finding was that there were only a handful of organizations that were performing tracking only in one ecosystem. So only on the web platform or only in the mobile platform. A majority of the trackers that we identified on the mobile platform already had a presence on the web, which basically tells us that cross-platform tracking is already the norm. In fact, if we look at the 20 biggest mobile tracker owning organizations, we find that 15 of them have a presence both on the mobile platform and the web. And this is a very interesting result, which basically tells us that it doesn't matter where you are or where you're from, your personally identifiable information, or PII, is more often than not going to cross borders. So when we looked at all of our users, we found that 70% of the PII that was gathered from Lumen users, or Lumen Privacy Monitor users, 70% of that data ended up going to a country that was different from where they were. So this data is crossing borders all the time. And when we looked specifically at European Union users, we found that 90% of their PII actually ended up in the United States. 90%, and that has it's a little interesting to see how the GDPR might change that. And we found that 4% ended up terminating in China. So about 95% of all of their PII ended up going outside of the EU. And this is what this graph shows. So on the left-hand side, we basically got all of the PII that ended up leaving the European Union. And on the right-hand side, you see where it actually went. And you can see basically, it doesn't matter where you are in the EU, your data is going to come to the United States, right? So the previous project that I just described, it's complete, it's been published, and I'm going to spend a couple of minutes to tell you about the stuff that's coming up soon. The previous project was very useful in helping us uncover the relationships between apps and trackers, right? So it was able to tell us what trackers were used by which apps in the Android ecosystem, right? And that was thanks to the Lumen Privacy Monitor, and that's the logo. So basically, we were able to draw these relationships right here. What it did not tell us anything about was what happened once these trackers had your data. What was happening to this data? Who was buying this data and for how much? Were there certain types of data that were more expensive or more useful for them to gather? That's basically the project that we're working on right now, and you can expect some work probably in the next couple of months from this project. A second thing that the previous two projects that I just described did not answer were whether the information that's being gathered by these trackers is actually useful, right? Or is it just excessive data gathering? So I want to know how the loss of user privacy due to all of this data that they collect, how that actually impacts the revenue gained by organizations who rely on targeted advertising, right? So put another way, I want to know what PII is a revenue generator for which industries, right? So to answer this question, I am actually looking to collaborate with people in the ad industry. So if you or someone you know is interested in helping us conduct experiments, please get in touch. We've got some experiments already spec'd out. So the end goal of my research is basically to be able to inform exploration into privacy-friendly economies for the internet. Currently, user data is the driving currency, and we need to find ways to replace it without completely destroying industries, right? So the question we need to answer is, what is a user data and PII-free internet economy that can still be profitable for all of the people that rely on these industries? A bigger picture for my research agenda is to just continue understanding these tussles until meaningful regulation is written around them. As for me, as Audrey announced, I will be moving to Iowa in a couple of weeks to start as an assistant professor there. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Data and Society. I really appreciate all you've done. And if anyone's interested in collaborating and helping us out, you can get in touch with me on Twitter or by email. Thank you.